specific area of investigation. And there were 2 test locations that had been identified. And if they did uncover something, then the work would be considered complete. So this is what they found. They found 9 grave shafts in the first work area and several of the excavations. They found what they referred to as coffin staining, and that's soil discoloration resulting from a decaying coffin. In one location, an intact coffin had a viewing window typical of the coffins from the early 20th century was located. 2 intact skeletons were found in 2 grave shafts that were investigated. All of the grave shafts appeared to be undisturbed, and grave artifacts that would have been left on the grave by loved ones were also found. In one grave shaft, a fragment of a ceramic vase was found, and in another 2 pennies, one dated 1916 and the other from 1923. The archaeologists have concluded that the presence of intact coffins and human remains indicates that it is an active cemetery. They will not investigate the other areas, and the archaeological work at this property is considered complete based on our contract with Cardinal. So the city, community, property owner will now begin the process to determine what will happen next in the active cemetery. So that's what they discovered during their ground truthing work.
So I guess that's the question, is what's next? What would happen? I mean, are we talking about an area that's under a building or a parking lot or
Well, there were several areas that the ground penetrating radar was used to determine if there were any potential graves present, and they did identify, several areas, and but it was determined that they would look at one area and confirm that in fact graves were in that space, and that's what they've done. And they will, from the archaeologist's perspective, there is no need to do other excavations as a result of that confirmation.
So what's on the table as far as what's next? Would they cordon off that property, or what's on the table?
Well, typically, what the consultant and archaeologists that work for them do is they will determine their findings in a report, document their findings, and then they will provide recommendations. One of the recommendations that always follows from this kind of work is a recommendation for the community to have a series of meetings to discuss its perspective on what should happen next as a result of what the findings indicate. And so that really is what the next step is. The community has an opportunity to discuss this, and there is a committee already formed in North Greenwood, and they've already had one organizing meeting, and this was all done in advance of what happened on Monday. So now that they have the Monday results, that will be incorporated into their community discussion, and then they will decide, at least from the community perspective, what they would like to see done next. Now, this is on private property, so there's another side to this, and that the Crum company, the family, they have a perspective on this as well, and so that's yet to be determined. What their point of view will be.
Now, you answered this earlier before we were starting, but how did this happen in the first place? How was this property that is a cemetery, how was it sold and built on?
Well, the church sold the property to developers, and the understanding was that the graves would be relocated to another cemetery in Dunedin. And that really was the prevailing belief, that the graves were moved, and many were, at least all those that were known to be there. And then over a period of time, people in the community kind of felt like maybe some of those graves were not moved. I'm not real sure if we had some families who had a list of graves that were supposed to be moved to that cemetery, and they could locate them when they went to the cemetery. to confirm that they were there, but certainly it's the feeling in the community was all the graves weren't moved, and so it's just over time that people kept saying, we believe that graves are still there, and so we came to a point where we asked the Crum family to consider. Well, not we, the community asked Crum family to consider an excavation, and we then partnered with the NAACP and in consultation with the family, the Crum business, this excavation occurred.
You surprised by what was found, or?
Well, I don't know if that's the right question to ask.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious.
I think that when you go back and look at some of the records would indicate that this cemetery was relocated. So I think the results would indicate that no, maybe it wasn't completely relocated. So yes, you'd have to be surprised that occurred. You had no other reason to believe that it was still an active cemetery, based on past records. Now we know that those records were not accurate, and so we now have an active cemetery that is sitting beneath a business.
Yeah. Well, like my question earlier is, there was no ill will or malcontent. There was nothing that was done kind of like, okay, well, let's ignore this and just build and nobody will notice.
Well, as of today, we have no information that would suggest that it was intentional. But that's based on the information that we have available to us now.
No, I mean, you remember the movie Poltergeist, where they, built a whole subdivision on a graveyard and didn't move any of the, so that was kind of
Yeah, we again, the history that's been accumulated so far would suggest that no one knew that those graves were still there when the cemetery was relocated to Dunedin.
You personally, what would you like to see done here?
Well, really, I think the reflection right now is on what is the appropriate way to show respect for this active cemetery. And I think, this is something that you just have to think about, and the people who are most impacted by it. Obviously, there are families who believe their loved ones were in this cemetery that was supposed to be completely located to Dunedin. And now it appears that, there are remains that didn't make that transfer. So, what is an appropriate way to show respect for those who are remaining? I mean, again, it's an active cemetery, so what do you do? And I would suspect there's plenty information about that centers around how these sorts of things are done, but I think it begins first with the community itself and how the community members believe it should be approached from their perspective. I mean, what I appreciate is the level of sensitivity that I think we're all are showing, the Crum family, the city, the community leadership, community members, and so we're entering a period of conversation now, and then that'll lead us to what's going to happen in the future.
Cool.
Is that good enough?
You knocked it out of the park.
I was moving over there so that you weren't looking at me and that you were looking at him.
Can you say your name on tape just so that?
Yes,
people back to the station?
Bill Horn, Horne, City Manager for the City of Clearwater.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So do you know how many people were buried there versus how many were moved and how many are